Welcome, everybody. It's time for another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Huber, joined today by John Doyle and his design dynamic duo sidekick, Dillon Baker. On today's episode, we're going to answer some listener questions, respond to some comments, and get an update on project designs here at Woodsmith and ShopNotes. Here's a quick message from our sponsor. You want a glue that you can trust, and fortunately, Titebond has the glue you need to get the job done with confidence. From interior glues with strong initial tack and short clamp time, to exterior glues with exceptional strength and water resistance, look to Titebond, the right glue for your next project. For more information, visit Titebond.com. All right, welcome, Dillon.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for being willing to do this on super short notice.
Yeah, of course.
Do we have to tell the people that the real reason Dillon's here is that Logan is suspended with pay for inciting the Shopsmith crowd again?
Oh, is that a thing?
No.
Yeah. It is once you hear a couple of the comments from last week's episode. So.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah. I'm going to launch into a few of these because it's pretty funny.
Well, we are in the public eye, so we are,
right.
Right. Scrutiny comes with the job.
Yep. All right. So here we'll go. We got BOY9GGZ says, my first major power tool purchase was a Shopsmith back in 1986. It's a great machine, especially since I only had enough space in my shop for one tool, and with the Shopsmith, I got several tools in one footprint. My shop space has expanded over the 30-plus years since. I have purchased several other stationary tools, but the Shopsmith remains as my drill press, lathe, and disc sander. Yep. And let's see, a couple other Shopsmith ones here. Floyd Olden says, so Logan, you can cut mortise and tenons on the Shopsmith with the horizontal boring feature, much like the Panto router as I understand it. I don't like commercially made tenoning jigs as they're too heavy, don't slide well, and seem cumbersome. Shopsmith here go for from $100 for a rusty 10ER to about $600 for a good 510. And then New Mexico Dan writes, I found Logan laughing at Shopsmith totally inappropriate. And all he complained about was the price, yet never gave any other discussion. Yes, the new ones are expensive, but they have a place. Yes, Logan, they are not for your shop, but they are appropriate. Laughing at the Shopsmith tenoning jig without describing what is wrong with it was also inappropriate. Goodbye. I'm departing from your show now. I wish you all well.
Inappropriate is Logan's middle name, so...
Right.
I feel like we should be getting Shopsmith sponsorship money as much as we talk about them. And as much as we get other people to talk about them.
Yeah.
So.
Have you had any Shopsmith experience, Dillon?
I've actually only seen one in person. A friend of mine that used to live here, he's from Des Moines originally, and now he lives out in Fort Collins. It was one of the, I think, the first tools that he ever acquired. His family had a cabin up in Lake Vermilion for several years, and I believe that there was a shop on their property, and that tool or piece of equipment was in the shop, and so he brought it back to Des Moines. But that's the only one I've actually seen in person. Of course, I've seen them online. I know, back in the heyday, people had nothing but good things to say about them, especially if you had a smaller shop. It was kind of an all-encompassing tool. Everything was on a little bit smaller scale, but I think they were, extremely appropriate for what they were being advertised for. And I know my buddy used his all the time. He did. I think like any tool, he kind of found himself using just a couple of them more than the other. So I think like the guy you mentioned, he used his drill press a lot and he used the lathe, but I don't think he used the other feature on here, his as much. But again, it's still validated having the tool. So,
right.
Yeah, but that's really my only and limited experience with ever seeing one. And I've never used one personally, but I think it was definitely more than just a novel idea. I wasn't even aware they still made them, so that's news to me. It just kind of goes to show how up to snuff I am on all modern equipment. But it's easy just to kind of get used to certain tools. It takes you long enough to figure out what you use most often, and so once you find it, you tend to stick with it. It's not like you go out and get all this stuff and it all ends up sticking around forever. It's just kind of a feeler process with tools. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think they have their niche and space saving properties, but personally, I'm lazy enough that I have a hard time getting the energy to change out a table saw blade or a router bit. So if I had to do change out tools or do some kind of setup, I would have a hard time keeping momentum, I feel like.
Yeah. So, if you know what you're going to do and you're going to be doing it for a while, I obviously that probably is a non-issue, but again, at least within our own shops and even the shop here, there's just so much going on. We all, of course, have the luxury of having all these tools too, and not everyone does, but we almost have all of these individual stations that we can go around to and just get things done quickly as we typically need them done. So, but they have their place, certainly.
Yeah. I think it would also be interesting to know and or follow along with somebody throughout a construction process of how that tool gets used. What is that? How does that affect planning and working? Which has applications for anybody who has a small workshop, in the sense that if you have a small space, then there are workflow constraints that you need to be thinking about.
Yeah.
To be fair, we're trying to we jest about the Shopsmith because it's emblematic in a lot of woodworking of people who talk about one aspect and then there's this jump on thing. Well, you should just do this. And then that's the easy magical wand waving answer to whatever pitfalls or problems somebody is having in their workshop.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely say Logan's comments are more tongue-in-cheek because we've discovered through the nearly almost 200 episodes we've done that if we say anything about the Shopsmith, we know we're going to get a reaction. And Logan loves reactions. So
right.
So it's mostly tongue-in-cheek.
Another topic that we had talked about on the last couple of podcasts was about tenoning jigs. And there were a couple more comments on that. Elfida 158 says, if you've ever made a raised panel or simply paneled cabinet doors where you are cutting the rails and stiles with a molding cutter, then you're going to want to use a tenoning jig. I'm sure there are guys with molding planes, or some use the router table, but I inherited an old Craftsman table saw from the early 70s where my father used it to add some cabinets to our kitchen. He had matching blade sets cut, or maybe they were off the shelf, and made the doors exclusively with a table saw and a jig that Craftsman branded as the universal jig. I was even able to recreate a broken stile for a buddy at work using a molding cutter and a tenoning jig. Sometimes you just want to work with the tools you have and not invest in new tools for a one-time job for a buddy. Oh, the first word of working. Don't tell your friends at work that you're into woodworking. Then you get my kid used the stretcher of our Windsor chair as a stepladder rung. Hey, you do woodworking.
Yeah, it's like you don't want people to know that you have a truck.
Right. Yeah. And then Jeff Baker says, despite all the talk of tenoning jigs and methods, no one invoked, at least by the 24-minute mark, the name of the Oracle, the teacher and user of the tenoning jig on that inspiring show that is making a comeback on YouTube. where he is referring to Norm Abrams, who uses a tenoning jig quite a bit.
In conjunction with his table saw.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we were talking about on the TV show we did a shop-made tenoning jig, and then talked about how, much like a Shopsmith, there is, two schools of thought on how you're going to do tenons at the table saw. Flat using a dado blade or using a tenoning jig.
Sure.
Do you have experience at all with a tenoning jig?
All the ones that I have ever, I would say the one that I've used most frequently is usually a shop-made one. I had an old, I think it was a Delta that came with my table saw years ago, and it was essentially just a glorified paperweight. And I don't think I have anything personally against them. I think it's just kind of where your mind goes when you're trying to solve these problems. It's, to me, it's just so situational or project specific that I hardly ever think of using a tenoning jig, like a store-bought one that people invest in and they keep in their shop for 100 years. I just think about making one that I know I need for that particular project, and more times than not, they're just as effective, and they weigh a lot less too, so they're a little bit easier to push. So I don't know. I guess if I was setting up to do 100 of these things, or if I was an actual somebody building cabinets for a living, I'd probably be more inclined to have something that was made out of cast that I knew I would have forever. But again, the way that I guess I solve issues, there's just I'd seem to default to just making things specific for what I'm working on.
Sure.
And with a shop-made one, the only thing you really have to adjust is the fence. Presumably you have a clamp of some sort that holds your piece vertical to the table saw table. But yeah, again, like I said, I've had an old Delta. I know we had either a Powermatic one in the shop forever.
Yep.
Rarely got used. Sorry if its feelings were hurt, but we're also just out in such a mode of creating things for other people to build and use. And so from an engineering standpoint, we're trying to come up with things that people can build in their shop rather than having to invest all this money in a tool that they may only use a couple times. So again, I think it's just probably more of a school of thought thing. Again, nothing against tenoning jigs, but my experience of store-bought ones is pretty limited.
Right. So would you say that you, in your own work, had a proclivity to use even a shop-made tenoning jig, or did you do tenons with a dado blade, kind of on the flat? Or did it depend on the project?
It definitely depended on the project, but I would be more inclined to probably use them with a dado, because you can get pretty close, and any sort of grooving that's left behind from the cutters on the dado blade, I think is just more room for glue to go, basically. So instead of having just a dead smooth surface, it's almost like crimping shop-made dowels out of a dowel rod. I usually use a pair of pliers to create these kind of basically fluting on the dowels for glue to go. And so I kind of look at that as a positive, where some people might just think, if I don't have a perfectly smooth tongue for my tenon, that it's an inferior, going to be an inferior joint, and I look at it as more of just a place for glue to go. So if I'm trying to do things quickly and accurately, I'll ultimately, I think I default to just basically using a sled or a miter gauge and cutting it with a dado stack, and then of course using my table saw fence as my kind of my setup guide for that. Yeah. Again, rarely have I done the perpendicular method. I have done it, but it's been a long time since I've done that.
Okay. Then that one commenter was talking about, I believe, if I'm understanding his comment right, about using a molding head cutter on the table saw, which we've done a couple of articles on those in ShopNotes in the past. So I will see if I can post one of those articles on ShopNotes, which those are kind of cool because it's kind of like a replaceable insert head that you put in the table saw, and then you can get basically like cope and stick cutters for it, or raised panel, or profiles, or something like that. They're kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Can be a little intimidating, I think, for some people, but one of the former editors here, Randy Maxey, I think did a whole set of kitchen cabinets using a molding head cutter on the table saw.
I'm trying to think if we still have one around here. I don't know if I've seen one recently.
Yeah. We used to. I'd have to take a look. So, and then one last question, which I think would be interesting for you, Dillon, is from our friend Puppy Doc, says Panto router or Shaper Origin?
That's a great question, and I'm embarrassed to admit that I've actually used neither one of those things. We had both in the shop for a while. I know Logan was doing an article for Pop Wood with the Panto that showed up, and I never got a chance to use it. I am intrigued by the Shaper Origin. I see a lot of people kind of starting to use them. Again, that was another tool that we got sent to us that we did, I think, probably an art. I don't know if we did one for Woodsmith. I know they did one for Pop Wood. Danielle Lowry, their kind of graphic designer, she ultimately did a project. It might have been one that Chris designed. It was basically a mobile kind of laptop stand that he had for his CNC that had some drawers or storage underneath. And I think for her to kind of be introduced or introduce herself to the tool, she just used a pre-existing plan just to kind of see how it functioned, and it seems to be a pretty handy tool. You know, kind of bringing, it fits in that category of like a track saw. You know, kind of bringing the tool to the work if it's too big, especially if you're working with sheet goods. Right. You know, I was definitely a person that kind of balked at the track saw. I didn't, again, more so because I didn't feel like I ever had any use for it, and now I almost use them exclusively. I mean, they just work great for sheet goods, and then even cross-cutting. I've cross-cut 6 and 8 quarter walnut with them, and they don't even leave any burn or blade marks on them. So I've been quite impressed with that. So I'm a convert on the track saw, so I don't know, maybe I should start trying to use the Shaper Origin. I, again, fall into the same sort of trappings we all do, where we just kind of get used to using the stuff that works, and one more so because it's here and handy. But I think I would probably get more use out of the Shaper Origin, I think, than the Panto router. I mean, I think it's cool that you can cut all these different types of tenons with the Panto router, but I personally don't do a lot of decorative stuff. I just need, good beefy structural joinery. And so if that's something I could do just as easy on a table saw and with a router, or using exclusively a router or even exclusively a table saw, I guess minus the mortising part of it, I would probably be more inclined to do that. I know Philip Morley's, he uses, he's got a shop made one of them that he designed and actually I think sells plans to. That's pretty cool. That functions very similarly. And he uses his a lot. So it's really more about the setup. And again, if you've got it set up for what you want it for and you're doing multiples of things, I think it works great. But I guess personally, I'd be more inclined to probably invest in the Shaper Origin. I think it probably has a little bit more capability because you're actually able to cut stuff out with that too if you want to. It's not just, doing mortise and tenoning. It does a lot of things. So I'm constantly looking for versatility in tools. I would rather have less stuff than more stuff. So
sure, I can see that.
And I consider myself kind of an old soul, and so sometimes I have a tendency to reject technology. And am trying to be better about, I think, just kind of developing a sort of new vocabulary with things and seeing how I can integrate that into the work that I do. Again, they don't have to do it all, but if they do serve a couple, quintessential purposes, I'm intrigued. So yeah, I guess as I continue to blather, Shaper Origin would be my tool of the two.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know price point wise. Honestly, they're probably pretty close. I think the Panto was, gosh, I don't want to give misinformation here, but I think they're pretty expensive. But so is the Shaper, but I think they're both probably pretty close.
Yeah. John, you have any thoughts? Would you having seen Logan mess with both of them on video?
Yeah, I personally haven't used either of them, but we've seen both of them come through and we've done videos on them. And if I were doing like just mainly joinery, I would probably lean to the panel router, but I've seen the Shaper do lots of joinery like dovetails and stuff. And then you could do lots of other things like, cut out shapes and signs and engraving and stuff. So if I was going for more versatile, I'd probably go with the Shaper Origin for the money. But
I did just look the two up as well, and there is about $1,000 difference. The Shaper Origin is, I think, around $2,900. Okay. And then the Panto is about $1,800. It looks like. Again, that kind of just depends on where you're getting it from, but I think say it's pretty accurate pricing on both of those. So,
okay. Well, that's our discussion topic for the comments section on our YouTube channel, or if you want to send us an email, woodsmith@woodsmith.com, is let's leave aside the true woodworking question as if you had the option to add one of these to your shop, what would be the driving force on it? Would it be something like a Panto router or something like the Shaper Origin? And what would lead you to that conclusion? What about the work that you do answers that in one form or another? So, yeah, I'd love to hear that. For me, I think if I had to choose, would probably be the Panto router, because it would be, of those two choices, would be because I would want something for having a joinery station, more or less dedicated.
Yeah.
I have other personal issues with the Panto router in the sense that I feel like a lot of times it's being billed as a tool that's trying to do too much. And I would want to have it kind of like a stripped down joinery workstation. Is it worth it at that price point? I don't know, but that's what I would say right now. Fired up. So that's why I'm interested to hear other people. Do you want that kind of unlimited versatility that is offered by the Shaper Origin in the sense that you can kind of take it anywhere or set it up as a workstation, or are you looking at the Panto router? Yeah. Let us know.
Yeah, that's a good point about the panel router, because it's not a very big tool. It's about the same size footprint as, say, like a mortising machine, but it does tenons and mortising. So, and then it takes all the tool changing to do that on your other tools. So it would be kind of nice to have a joinery station, as you put it. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. You want a glue that you can trust, and fortunately, Titebond has the glue you need to get the job done with confidence. From interior glues with strong initial tack and short clamp time to exterior glues with exceptional strength and water resistance, look to Titebond, the right glue for your next project. For more information, visit titebond.com.
I guess back to the tool of choice that I had gravitated towards is I think for the type of work I've been thinking about and even doing outside of work, I think the Shaper Origin probably just lends itself to that type of work more, because I am starting to build more basically like things out of Baltic birch and plywood, and just kind of exploring that as a material. And I'm really constantly thinking about workspace too. I mean, of course, having a workbench I feel like is a necessity in a shop, but I probably am more inclined to want a table that's like a 4x8 table, whether that's, you know, something that's knocked down or it's, you know, something a little more permanent that has casters on it. You can move it around, but you can lock it in place, just to accommodate bigger sheets of plywood, and then just bringing the tools to the piece rather than the other way around. So I think for me too, there's probably a little bit more to learn with the shaper, which I'm intrigued by too, and not only knowing what it does, but what it could do. So there's kind of a little bit more, I think, of a sense of exploration for me with that, because it is a tool, but it's also a piece of technology. So again, I guess it's more personal than anything and specific to the type of work I'm doing. But I think that's probably what would drive me a little bit more, or why I gravitate towards something like the Shaper Origin. I think just people that are in the business, especially the woodworking business, that are creating new types of tools to perform, you know, old functions, but potentially new ones, is just of interest to me. And of course, we have the luxury of working with somebody like Chris Fitch that we all joke about should be, you know, probably working at NASA in some capacity. It's just fun to see him kind of tinker with the CNC. I continue to tell myself that, you know, I want to become more proficient with it, and I want to learn how to use it and use it well, and I've still not created time to do that. But it is cool to hear him talk about all the things that he has done and what he's thinking about doing with that, and kind of maximizing the capability of a piece of technology like that.
Yeah. You touch on two good points that I want to come back to here, in that I'm really interested about the idea of, you know, we often will talk about must-have tools or things like that, or, you know, essential tools, and there's value in that. But I think, like you said, everybody has such a personal working style, that to say that that this tool or that tool is a must-have, is a little disingenuous to other options that are available, or to somebody's given style or preferences for work. You know, like you were talking about, you know, bringing the tool to the workpiece rather than having a variety of stationary tools. You know, and that, you know, both you and John are building projects in the shop, but to watch the two of you work, there's some overlap in tools, and yet there's also some quite varied differences in it too. Yeah. I mean, even if you put us, you know, on opposite sides of the shop doing the same project, that would be an interesting, you know, kind of observation too, is just to see like where your mind defaults for application when you're doing something, right? There's probably completely different workflows on that, and that would just, I don't know, kind of be an interesting, I guess, social experiment, because neither one of us would be wrong. You know, we're just kind of both trying to work through what's going to be the most efficient, but also trying to battle what we just default to thinking about too when we use stuff. So our natural default settings. But yeah, I would be remiss to tell anyone that they have to have anything. I mean, especially after getting out of college and having everybody tell you that, and then fighting against, you know, feeling like you have to have all of these things too. Because like, let's face it, woodworking is an expensive hobby, or can be. Right. You know, not including, you know, put aside having to acquire certain tools. I mean, just having the space. And if you don't have it at your house or in a garage, you know, you're renting space, and that's a huge cost. And so I wouldn't want to get ahead of myself here and tell people what they have to have, because really it's just so contingent on what type of work you want to do. And woodworking is kind of a lifelong pursuit. So you probably won't ever really know, but the longer you do it, you'll start to kind of figure things out and kind of weed through your inventory of what you have and what you need and what you don't need. So, yeah. But it is
it's great to be in a position where you can kind of start a deductive process and just been around or part of the discipline long enough to, again, know what like good group of tools you need to do the things that you need to do. I'm constantly working through that between the stuff that I do here and the stuff I do outside of work. You know, if the day comes, I do finally set up my own personal shop, what can I get away with having? So.
Yeah. No, and then the other point that I was thinking is you were talking about a workstation in the sense of working with Baltic birch plywood on stuff and maybe being on wheels, is I think that would be a really cool ShopNotes article or collection of articles, in the sense that, you know, we've done one wall workshops and things like that. What if we did an article with projects to go with it on not really a portable workshop, but more of like a handheld tool, power tool workshop.
Sure.
Where it's designed around a track saw, a handheld router, drills and drivers, places to put all of, you know, some of that gear, and is a mobile station in the sense that farther down on the project you can have it up against the wall because you don't need to get to all sides of it, but early on when you have big sheets of plywood and you need to just whack them down into smaller pieces, it's nice to have that all around access to things.
Yeah,
that would be
definitely.
really cool.
Things get lost in drawers quick, so
especially seeing how I mean, you and Mark share one end of the shop here at Woodsmith, and I think you both have influenced each other on workflow in using the big outfeed tables or assembly tables that we have as a companion to a workbench for how things get built and where parts get cut and all that kind of stuff too. So
yeah, it's pretty funny to watch Mark work because I don't even know, he doesn't even really use his bench. I mean, it's a gathering place for things that he needs to use to work on a project, but he's rarely ever building something on his bench.
Yeah.
But again, he also has the luxury of being in a shop that's probably a couple thousand square feet, and he has, you know, he's basically only sharing space with one other person. I know you alluded to the fact that I have, you know, kind of an area in there, but he's not having to deconstruct things at the end of the day. But you're right. I mean, he too is kind of working in a similar fashion. You know, we've got these 2-inch thick pieces of insulation foam that we buy in 4x8 sheets, and we use that as our backer boards when we're cutting plywood, or really cutting anything on a big surface like that, just to, you know, prevent blowout and obviously cutting into your work surface. But it seems like he's been working in that fashion for quite some time now. And I don't know if that's, you know, influenced by me or it's just, you know, the kind of development or evolution of how Mark works based on the types of projects he's getting. But then again, he does work on a lot of my projects, so I guess I'm partially to blame. Mark's also very jig oriented too.
Sure.
He really doesn't feel comfortable doing stuff by hand, which, you know, I can understand that. I mean, it's kind of a refinement thing for him. You know, if he thinks he's going to get better results with a jig, that's what he's going to do, and that's what he ultimately does. But then you have the contrast to that, where, you know, Steve uses a lot of hand tools and he's very comfortable and proficient with using those. And so again, back to that kind of default process of how you're going to build something, you know, they couldn't be more different, and that's kind of nice to have that sort of contrast or, you know, dynamic in the shop.
And I hadn't thought of it that way in terms of, you know, how is Mark's workflow changed by the types of projects that he gets, and who's the designer of that project is kind of an interesting thought too. So makes me think that we need to get Mark on the show here again sometime and talk to him about what it's like to have been corrupted by working at Woodsmith for as long as he has now.
I'm sure he would love to tell all. It is funny though, because I talk about Mark being kind of a jig-oriented builder. I mean, you can tell when he's looking at plans, it's just like not only how am I going to build this, which I mean anybody would go through that process, but you could tell that he wants to use jigs where he can.
Right.
He doesn't want to have to make a bunch of them. Obviously, less is more sometimes, but you can kind of. He definitely wears it on his face when you have to tell him that there's some sort of organic shape that can't be done with it can't be done with a jig. I remember that kind of Wendell Castle inspired stack laminated end table I did. I could just tell that the wheels were turning, and he fought that just because again it was this organic cutout shape that required a lot of power. It was a power tool he was using ultimately, but it was free form. There was no fixed point to it, and
right.
Those, even Steve, I think they feel uncomfortable doing those sorts of things, and I think it just comes from just a lack of confidence in doing them. And I get that, but sometimes you kind of just have to leap into the unknown sometimes to figure it out. But
yeah,
nevertheless, it's a fun thing to watch sometimes.
The result of that, though, I think is really good, because then when we present it in the magazine, that is a fresh new experience for Mark, and then that gets translated in how the article is written and presented, instead of it being almost the way that you would teach somebody to drive. You've been driving for so long that you just don't remember what it was like to start driving.
Right.
So then it becomes difficult to explain that to somebody. Whereas if you've just recently learned something and now to try to explain that, a lot of those lessons or application points or whatever are really top of mind for you.
Yeah, and when it comes down to it, it's just a feeling, right? I mean, driving is just kind of a feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, you get in your car, you start it up, you go, you know how the car drives typically, you know what the rules of the road are. I mean, it doesn't really require a lot of thinking, which can be scary sometimes. But I think the same can be applied to certain tools you use too. I mean, you don't really have to think about a whole lot, because you just do it. I mean, you've been doing it that way for however long, and yeah.
All right, so John, what projects are you working on right now?
I'm still working on the same gift box project that I've probably mentioned the last 2 episodes.
Kicking your butt.
I know, it's kind of gone down, a couple different routes, I guess, but we've been filming TV show episodes in between there, so kind of been back and forth on that. So, but kind of started out with a puzzle box idea. Now I'm like, it being the issue that comes out around Christmas time, I'm like, maybe it's like a gift box scrap, project type of thing where you can make little gift boxes for trinkets or gift cards or, small items to make them special rather than, just put them in a cardboard box or whatever. So still kicking around ideas there, but we're wrapping up the current issue of Woodsmith. It's going out the door today. So that means the next issue needs to be in the shop. So time crunch time. So, so that's what I've been working on.
Big wheels keep on turning is what they say.
Never stops.
No pressure.
Dillon, how about you? What are the projects on your to-do list?
So Mark just wrapped up one for the same issue John was talking about that I did. It was Architect's Cabinet. And then otherwise let's see, I'm staring at my other computer here. I just finished drawings for a shop stool for the next issue of ShopNotes for 146. Mark will be working on that once he gets back. I'm actually kind of excited about it. The The backrest on it is kind of inspired by some of the backs that Hans Wagner had in some of his chair. I borrowed that, book of yours and kind of wanted to take a look at some of the construction methods that he used and see if I couldn't integrate, if not, a percentage of one of those into ours without making it overly complicated. But I think it'll be a nice little shop project. I think I'm going to have him build it out of hickory, and then maybe introduce another like secondary domestic wood for either the seat and certainly the splines that will join the backrest in a 2-part construction. Otherwise, I have another project for that issue too. That's going to be basically a wall hanging. Trying to how I would describe it. Storage / display. As we've been talking about the types of tools that we use or default to using. I think sometimes with these shop projects, the best way to get started is just start to think about those tools you do use or you want out in front of you at all times. And so I'll probably make a list of those tools that I use, and I think that might help drive the layout at least a little bit. But I do like the idea of having the tools exposed. I know you and I had talked about that a little bit, Phil. You had sent me some inspiration pieces. One was from Fine Woodworking, and then I don't recall where the other two were from, but I do like that idea of having things just out. Drawers are great to store stuff and keep stuff out of the way and keep sawdust off stuff, but drawers can also be also a trap too, where you put something in, you never find it again, and if it's not in your purview, you don't think about it either. So it's just a tool that exists without purpose. But those are the two that are, I guess, priority right now. John and I are obviously always looking into the future because we have to, because the projects start with us and then evolve from there in terms of how things are put together for the magazine. Yeah, I'm pretty good at rambling on, but I think that's probably a good place for me to kind of conclude with the projects that I'm working on, because otherwise we'll be here for another 2 days.
Yeah.
What about you, Phil?
I have several projects that I'm working on. I have a carved sign here that's based off of Chris's Green Dragon pub sign that we did a few years ago, and I really want to get that done. I'm close to wrapping up the roughing out stage, and then can get into the detailed dressing up, final forming that I want to do on that. I also have some shop projects that I want to do. The tool cabinet that I made for myself probably about 10 years ago has an open compartment in it. It's similar to one in Mark's tool cabinet. And it seemed like a great idea at the time, but right now, just as you were alluding to with the shop drawers, turns into a little bit of a black hole. Mm-hmm. I can put a bunch of stuff in there, but for some reason, the stuff that goes in there just disappears. Mm-hmm. And then it turns into such a tangle to get something out that I will almost avoid working on or wanting to get that tool out, because I know that it's just going to be like mining for mithril or something like that. It's just going to take a while to get down there. So I want to rework that space, maybe with some pull-out trays instead to hold some carving tools, which would involve making some trays and small boxes and stuff like that, which I think would be fun to do. So,
well, if you can't find any use for it, or you find yourself continuing to procrastinate that particular project, you could always just board it up like a hurricane's coming and just forget about it.
There is that also, yes. I've also had in the back of my head, speaking of Hans Wegner, of making a dining chair based on some of his... he had a class of chairs called cattle chairs, just because they had horn shapes on they weren't really full armrests. It more was just like elbows, so that the arm didn't come all the way to the front. And I like that form because you can push those much closer to a dining table without the arm getting in the way. So I've wanted to come up with my own version of that, and I think it's just time that I just do it rather than continue to ponder it in a way that prevents me from actually doing anything. Because I think you guys have expressed that on other things with projects where it's just like you can talk yourself into circles on something and never actually get around to coming up with something until you kind of take a leap. So I'm going to try that. So there you are. That wraps up another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or smart remarks, I want to hear about it. You can send those to us via email, woodsmith@woodsmith.com, or in the comment section on our YouTube channel. We had a discussion question earlier in the show about router joinery machines, some of the newish ones that are out there. Panto router versus Shaper Origin. Pros and cons on why you would choose one or the other, and avoiding the angry, they're all trash and too expensive motif. See if you can do that. Special thanks to today's sponsor, Titebond Glue. There's bottles of Titebond Glue all over the Woodsmith shop, video studio, and workshop. Why? Because we use it all the time. So you want to check out their full range of glues, see which bottles you want to keep in your shop. Check it out at titebond.com. Thanks, everybody. Bye.